What potent malevolence, what profound darkness could possibly incite the Almighty to obliterate two entire metropolises with celestial fire? This is far from a simple ancient fable. It stands as a potent admonition, a message that continues to echo through the ages. The cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, once vibrant hubs of existence, teeming with dwellings, bustling marketplaces, families, and individuals, much like ourselves, underwent a devastating transformation. A grave perversion had taken hold. The populace's hearts had grown calloused, their actions so depraved that they plunged into depths of sinfulness beyond even divine endurance. In an act of immense compassion and forbearance, the divine dispatched two celestial emissaries to issue a solemn warning. However, instead of receiving them with benevolence, the inhabitants of Sodom attempted to inflict harm upon them. That night marked a somber and tragic turning point. The divine decree was rendered, and in a fleeting instant, fiery, sulphurous precipitation descended from the heavens, utterly annihilating the cities. No trace remained, no structures, no flora, no human life. Only the acrid smoke ascending from the cinders where existence had once thrived. But what transgressions precipitated such a severe condemnation? What could have been so egregious as to warrant the complete obliteration of entire populations? Was it merely the misdeeds of a select few, or was there a more pervasive corruption at play? These are not merely antiquated infractions. Identical transgressions fester within our contemporary world. In this discourse, we shall delve into the 5 principal sins attributed to Sodom and Gomorrah, and you may find yourself astonished at their striking relevance to our present reality. What revelations do these transgressions offer regarding the inherent nature of humanity? And how might we safeguard ourselves from succumbing to the very pitfalls that led to the city's ruin? If you are prepared to unearth the concealed truths behind the downfall of Sodom and Gomorrah and to glean the lessons from their ultimate fate, signify your readiness by typing 777 in the comments section. Remain engaged, for the insights we are about to explore possess the potential to fundamentally alter your perception of the world today. Are you poised for this exploration? Let us commence. The 5 principal sins of Sodom and Gomorrah. Why did God destroy them? 1. Rampant sexual immorality. Within the core of ancient Sodom, a locale where sin had deeply entrenched itself, contaminating every facet of life, a narrative unfolded destined to serve as an eternal cautionary tale for all generations. The 19th chapter of Genesis chronicles the mission of 2 angels, dispatched by God and disguised as mortal men, to visit the city of Sodom. Lot, a man of integrity dwelling amidst this corrupted populace, extended them sanctuary within his abode. Yet, as the city descended into darkness that fateful night, an unspeakably horrific event transpired. The men of Sodom, encompassing all age groups, converged outside Lot's dwelling, forming a menacing throng that encircled it. Their clamor intensified, fueled by carnal desire and rage, as they demanded that Lot surrender his visitors. Their intent was not mere acquaintance, but violation, a profound and unsavory act of intimacy. In biblical context, the term employed here signifies a far deeper, more sinister meaning than a simple introduction or handshake. It implies a forceful, immoral act, one designed to strip away dignity and humanity. The Sodomites exhibited no interest in hospitality, kindness, or respect. They were driven by an insatiable hunger for dominion, supremacy, and subjugation. It transcended mere lust. It represented their utter contempt for human dignity and the sanctity of life itself. These were not ordinary guests. They were divine messengers from the Almighty. Nevertheless, the people of Sodom displayed no reverence, no deference, not even towards celestial beings. They demonstrated a willingness to defile the very principles of hospitality and honor that formed the bedrock of ancient societies. Have we, too, borne witness to, or participated in, a world where boundaries are no longer revered, where respect for fellow beings is eroded, and moral principles are transgressed with impunity? In Sodom, what had once been a beautiful divine endowment, sexuality, had been perverted into an instrument of coercion and degradation. The Almighty's original design for human intimacy was intended to be pure, a reflection of love and commitment. However, in Sodom, it devolved into a grotesque mockery of the Creator's intentions. Does it not often feel as though we perceive the echoes of Sodom's moral degeneration in our contemporary world? Society increasingly trivializes purity and respect, championing the very practices the divine condemns. We inhabit an era where distinctions blur and sanctity is derided. It is facile to dismiss this narrative as mere ancient history, but one must ponder what transpires when a society ceases to value the pure and the sacred. How profound must moral corruption become before the divine declares it unendurable? Sodom's ultimate fate was not solely determined by its actions, but by the hardened disposition of its inhabitants. They had long spurned what was righteous, and in their presumptuousness remained oblivious to the repercussions of their choices. When they no longer honored the divine or the sanctity of existence, the Almighty intervened. This account serves as a potent reminder that the disregard for the sacred carries consequences. The pivotal question remains: will we learn from their missteps, or will we persist on the identical trajectory? Ultimately, this narrative eschews judgment. Rather, it aims to illuminate the perils of moral compromise. It functions as a cautionary testament, urging us to introspect upon our individual lives, our actions, and the world surrounding us. How frequently do we, even incrementally, transgress the boundaries of what is deemed right? How often do we disregard the sacred until we find ourselves in a state where discerning the light becomes an impossibility? While the Almighty's judgment upon Sodom was undeniably severe, it was also just. This decision was not impulsive. Rather, it was the culmination of centuries of admonition. Consequently, Sodom and Gomorrah became emblematic of the outcome when sin reaches its zenith. The annihilation of these cities served as a stark testament to the destructive power of moral decay and the imperative of upholding what is holy and unblemished. As we contemplate our own lives and societies, we must ask ourselves, are we progressing along the same course? What principles do we uphold? And are we resolute in safeguarding the sacred, the pure, and the virtuous? The choice, as ever, rests with us. And much like Lot, we must resolve to stand firm in our faith, even when the world around us succumbs to moral desolation. 2. Pride and arrogance. The second principal transgression that precipitated Sodom's downfall was pride, an arrogance so profound that it rendered the populace blind to their own moral deterioration. Many years following Sodom's obliteration, the prophet Ezekiel offered further insight into the reasons for its destruction, stating, "This was the sin of your sister Sodom. She and her daughters were arrogant, overfed, and unconcerned. They did not aid the poor and the needy." Ezekiel 16, verse 49. These pronouncements offer a somber reflection upon the spiritual and moral decline of a people who possessed abundant material possessions yet lacked that which was most vital. Pride is a perilous force, not always conspicuous or overt. It frequently operates subtly in the background, insidiously corrupting a society until it decays from within. The inhabitants of Sodom were steeped in pride. Intoxicated by their affluence and comforts, they perceived themselves as invincible, standing superior to all others. They enjoyed a surplus of sustenance, considerable wealth, and ample leisure to indulge their pleasures. However, rather than leveraging their blessings for the benefit of others or to glorify the divine, they turned inward. They looked down upon the impoverished, the destitute, and those in their vicinity, deeming themselves superior to everyone else. This pervasive pride became a shroud over their hearts, causing them to lose sight of fundamental principles such as humility, benevolence, and compassion. It is not difficult to envision how a society characterized by such opulence and excess could cultivate arrogance. How frequently do we observe pride taking root in our contemporary world? When circumstances are favorable, when we are surrounded by blessings, it is remarkably easy to forget the source of those blessings. The temptation arises to believe that we have attained everything through our own efforts, that we require no one, not even the Almighty. Yet, the Scriptures consistently caution against the dangers inherent in such a mindset. Consider, for instance, the downfall of Babylon. The Bible recounts that Babylon's pride ultimately proved to be its undoing, as it proclaimed, "I am, and there is none besides me. I shall not sit as a widow or know the loss of children." Isaiah 47, verse 8. Nevertheless, in a single night, Babylon crumbled. The same principle applies to Egypt, which ascended to prominence through its own vaunted pride, only to be humbled by the divine hand. Even the formidable King Nebuchadnezzar was compelled to acknowledge the Almighty's sovereignty after enduring years of madness brought on by his boastful arrogance. Pride invariably finds a way to insinuate itself, subtly inflating the ego and convincing us of our self-sufficiency. This illusory sense of invincibility is perilous because it severs our connection with the divine. As the people of Sodom succumbed to pride, they began to believe they were impervious to any divine judgment. However, the tragic irony of pride lies in its capacity to blind us to our spiritual destitution. The inhabitants of Sodom believed they possessed everything: material wealth, pleasures, status. Yet they were spiritually bankrupt, utterly unaware of their profound need for the Almighty. It is a sobering contemplation, is it not? How often do we witness these identical patterns in our personal lives and within our society? When we place our trust in wealth, status, or the ephemeral comforts of this world, we risk becoming akin to Sodom, blinded by pride and lost in our own self-sufficiency. To what extent have we allowed our own pride to shape our existence? Do we place greater reliance on our own capabilities and resources than on the divine provision? The narrative of Sodom and Gomorrah stands as a stark admonition against the perils of pride. In their arrogance, the people of Sodom deemed themselves untouchable. Yet, divine judgment descended swiftly, and their collapse was a crushing defeat. Pride invariably precedes destruction, and the Almighty will humble those who refuse to acknowledge their dependence upon Him. Let this account serve not merely as a chronicle of an ancient city's demise, but as a subtle warning against the insidious danger of pride that resides within each of us. Are we vigilant against its encroachment? Are we sufficiently humble to recognize our insignificance without the divine? Or are we, much like Sodom, perilously close to becoming spiritually void while immersed in abundance? 3. Lack of hospitality. The third principal transgression that led to Sodom's downfall was their profound absence of hospitality. In the ancient world, hospitality transcended a mere gesture of kindness or politeness. It represented a sacred obligation deeply interwoven into the societal fabric. Upon a traveler's entry into a settlement, the populace was expected to provide sustenance, hydration, shelter, and protection. This custom was rooted in the fundamental human need for fellowship, compassion, and the care of vulnerable individuals. To welcome a stranger was to accord them the honor of being a guest of the divine, as a divine presence was often perceived in the form of passing travelers. However, in Sodom, the antithesis of this practice unfolded. When two angels, cloaked in human guise, entered the city, the people of Sodom, irrespective of age, congregated outside the residence of Lot, the righteous man. Instead of extending hospitality, they surrounded his dwelling, demanding that Lot hand over his guests. Their intentions were far from amicable. They sought to harm, abuse, and violate the visitors who had graced their city. What ought to have been a serene visit, a simple moment of shared fellowship, devolved into a night of sheer terror. Those who should have offered warmth and protection instead chose to inflict violence upon those who sought refuge at their threshold. This was not merely an act of discourtesy, it constituted a deep and fundamental evil. Sodom's transgression in this instance extended beyond the violation of social conventions to the violation of something far more profound. the divine mandate to extend love, protection, and care to fellow human beings. Hospitality, in the divine perspective, mirrors the very essence of God's nature. The Almighty Himself welcomes the stranger and safeguards the defenseless. Throughout the Old Testament, numerous instances illustrate the command for God's people to exhibit kindness and generosity towards strangers, as exemplified in Hebrews 13, verse 2. Do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for by doing so some have entertained angels without knowing it. Consequently, when the inhabitants of Sodom responded to their guests with aggression, it represented not only an offense against societal norms, but a direct affront to the very manner in which the divine desires humanity to interact. It was not merely a deficiency in courtesy, but a repudiation of the divine character itself. The Almighty regards hospitality with utmost seriousness, as it reflects His boundless love and concern for all people. When His followers fail in this imperative of compassion, they fail to embody His image in the world. And it is a sobering thought, is it not? How often do we take hospitality for granted in our contemporary society? Are we receptive to strangers, willing to offer kindness and assistance, or do we isolate ourselves from the surrounding world? The manner in which we treat others, particularly strangers, speaks volumes about the condition of our hearts. In a society where division, judgment, and mistrust frequently prevail, the act of extending hospitality, of truly welcoming others with open arms, is more than just a benevolent deed. It is an expression of our alignment with the divine heart. The people of Sodom failed this test most egregiously. They not only rejected strangers, but actively assaulted them, failing to recognize the sacred nature of their actions, thereby sealing their ultimate doom. This deficit in hospitality was not a mere oversight. It was a stark indicator of their spiritual state. When we decline to offer hospitality, we may not always recognize it, but we are turning our backs on the divine call to love one another as He loves us. What of us today? How do we treat the stranger, the marginalized, the one who differs from us? Do we offer a welcoming smile, a helping hand, or do we shut the door in their faces, too preoccupied with our own comfort and security to acknowledge the needs of others? The example of Sodom challenges us to examine our own conduct and our responses to those who require kindness and protection. In our world, where individuals are frequently marginalized or left behind, this narrative compels us to act. Are we opening our hearts to others, or are we closing them off? Are we reflecting the divine heart of hospitality, or have we allowed the spirit of Sodom to infiltrate our own hearts? 4. Oppression of the poor and needy. The fourth cardinal sin that led to Sodom's destruction was the subjugation of the poor and needy. Once more, we refer to the pronouncements of the prophet Ezekiel, who underscores this profound failure. Alongside pride and material abundance, Sodom was guilty of deliberately disregarding the struggles of the impoverished, the vulnerable, and the marginalized. Ezekiel declares, "This was the sin of your sister Sodom. She and her daughters were arrogant, overfed, and unconcerned. They did not aid the poor and the needy." Ezekiel 16, verse 49. This statement transcends a mere commentary on Sodom's material wealth. It constitutes an indictment of their refusal to extend compassion to those in most desperate need. Throughout the sacred texts, the Almighty has unequivocally articulated His profound concern for the impoverished, the oppressed, and the forgotten. Time and again, He commands His people to feed the hungry, protect the widow, and care for the orphan. Isaiah 1, verse 17, states, "Learn to do good, seek justice, correct oppression, bring justice to the fatherless, plead the widow's cause." These are not occasional exhortations. They are foundational tenets of the divine kingdom. The treatment of the vulnerable is not an optional footnote in the Scriptures. It is a reflection of the very heart of God. Divine justice and mercy are intricately intertwined, demanding that we demonstrate care for those who are unable to care for themselves. However, in Sodom, this sacred duty was disregarded. The inhabitants of Sodom were affluent, possessed ample food, and enjoyed abundant resources. They had more than enough to share. Yet they adamantly refused to open their hearts or their hands to those in need. Instead of offering mercy, they elected to close their doors and hearts to the vulnerable. This was not simply an oversight. It was a deliberate choice to luxuriate in comfort while others endured suffering. The people of Sodom evinced no compassion for the destitute, and this refusal to provide assistance deeply incensed the Almighty. Why? Because when we elect not to aid the weak and the needy, we are not merely turning away from individuals. We are turning away from the Almighty Himself. He has chosen to identify with the poor, the oppressed, and the marginalized. This is not solely a matter of individual transgression. It represents a societal failing. Divine judgment is not exclusively reserved for individuals who commit personal sins. It also descends when entire communities or nations neglect to act justly, when they disregard mercy, and when they permit the impoverished to suffer while others prosper. We witness this pattern throughout the history of Israel and other nations. When Israel oppressed the poor or abandoned justice, God dispatched prophets to issue warnings. In Ezekiel 22, verse 29, the Almighty condemns the leaders of Israel for their exploitation and oppression of the poor and needy. Similar condemnations befell Edom, Tyre, and other nations when they ignored the pleas of the oppressed. Therefore, what transpired in Sodom was not merely an individual lapse. It was a collective failing, a societal breakdown where injustice and apathy became the prevailing norm. Sodom, in its arrogance, had forgotten that prosperity carries inherent responsibility. It had forgotten that to live in abundance necessitates sharing that abundance with those less fortunate. Is this not a sentiment that resonates with us even today? We inhabit a world where poverty, hunger, and need are rampant. Every day we receive reports of individuals requiring sustenance, shelter, medical attention, and protection. How often do we find ourselves in situations where we possess the capacity to assist but choose not to? How frequently do we avert our gaze from surrounding suffering, rationalizing that it is not our concern? The truth is, when we elect inaction and turn away from the cries of the poor, we are repeating the very errors committed by Sodom. We become complicit in their failure to love our neighbors. Consider this. If we possess the means to help, whether through our time, resources, or influence, and we elect not to, what does that signify about us? Are our lives lived in a manner that reflects the Almighty's heart for justice and mercy? The people of Sodom had the capacity to help, yet they chose otherwise. They thrived in luxury while others languished without. How often do we mirror this behavior in our own lives? When we overlook injustice, we become integral to the very systems that perpetuate it. The Almighty calls us to a higher standard, to care for the poor and the oppressed, to exhibit mercy and justice in the world around us. As you reflect on this, ask yourself, what actions are you taking to assist those in need? Are you living in a manner that mirrors the Almighty's heart for justice? Are you opening your heart to the vulnerable, or are you closing it off through selfishness? The narrative of Sodom is not merely a historical account of ancient devastation. It serves as a timeless admonition for us all. 5. Rebellion against God and unrepentance. The fifth and final sin that sealed the doom of Sodom and Gomorrah was their rebellion against the Almighty and their persistent unrepentance. This transgression was not merely a matter of making erroneous choices. It represented outright defiance of the Creator. The people of Sodom did not simply err out of ignorance or weakness, they reveled in their sin. They harbored no inclination to change, no remorse, no desire for repentance. They stood firm in their rebellion, disregarding every summons to transformation, and this, perhaps more than any other factor, grieved the divine heart. In His benevolence, the Almighty had afforded them a period of grace. He had issued warnings. He had dispatched His messengers, including Abraham, who interceded fervently on their behalf, imploring the Almighty to spare the cities if even 10 righteous individuals could be discovered. Yet despite Abraham's heartfelt plea, not even 10 righteous souls could be found. What a profoundly sobering realization. a city so thoroughly permeated with wickedness that even the few who might have possessed righteousness were nowhere to be located. This represented not simply an individual failure, but a collective disintegration. A society that had so completely rejected righteousness that not even a handful of virtuous individuals remained. Even Lot, who resided amongst them, endeavored to warn his sons-in-law. He implored them to depart the city before its impending destruction. However, they dismissed his counsel with derision, regarding his warnings as foolishness, utterly incapable of comprehending the gravity of the impending catastrophe. They must have reasoned, nothing adverse is going to occur. They consistently overlooked every possibility to retreat, every opening to alter their direction. How frequently do we observe individuals around us disregard pronouncements of caution, scoff at the notion of divine retribution, and assume existence will continue as it always has, irrespective of the evident signs surrounding them? However, it wasn't solely the inhabitants of Sodom who disregarded the advisement. It was the entirety of their society, the collective consciousness of the city that had become impervious to divine entreaties for amendment. Even when celestial beings presented themselves, illuminating the truth, they persisted in their refusal to cease. They advanced further into obscurity, incapable or unwilling to perceive the brilliance. This is precisely what deeply grieved God. He is characterized by his forbearance and benevolence, granting numerous opportunities. Yet, a threshold is reached where, if individuals refuse to adapt, judgment inevitably ensues. And this is precisely the sequence of events that transpired. Following all the issued warnings, the period of clemency concluded. Fire and brimstone descended from the firmament, and the urban centers were reduced to cinders. What was once teeming with vitality and exuberance transformed into a desolate, smoldering ruin. A locale that had once echoed with children's laughter, radiated the warmth of hearths, and vibrated with the industrious sounds of a flourishing populace was obliterated, leaving behind only utter devastation. Is it not true that even in the present day, divine grace offers us chances? Each dawn presents another occasion for contrition, another possibility to disengage from our own transgressions and orient ourselves towards the divine. But how often do we squander these very prospects? How often do we dismiss the signals under the delusion that we are unassailable, that the repercussions of our deeds are distant, or that we possess ample time? The narrative of Sodom and Gomorrah serves as a stark reminder that a point arrives when the warnings cease, when the season for repentance expires and judgment is enacted. As Lot and his kin were absconding from the city, they were furnished with unambiguous directives. Do not cast your gaze backward, flee for your very existence. The instruction was straightforward yet paramount. Evade the cataclysm and refrain from looking behind. The city steeped in sin had no place in their future. Yet, amidst their escape, a calamitous event occurred. Lot's wife, despite the admonitions, turned back. Although she had physically departed the city, her affections remained tethered to it. She yearned for the life she was abandoning, and in that singular instant she was transmuted into a monument of salt. Her predicament stands as a poignant testament to the peril of persistent attachment to wrongdoing. Even when afforded the opportunity to escape, to relinquish the elements that have held us captive, we must not look back. To do so is to harbor a longing for precisely those things that precipitated our ruin. It serves as a reminder that contrition extends beyond merely physically distancing oneself from sin. It necessitates a reorientation of our hearts away from it as well. In our own lives, how frequently do we find ourselves in a state of conflict, torn between the former existence we are summoned to forsake and the new reality God has established for us? How often do we cling to the past, even as the Almighty beckons us forward towards something superior? Lot's wife functions as a cautionary figure for us all. Her incapacity to completely extricate herself from Sodom became her undoing. She was required to release the past to fully embrace the future that Providence presented. But she was unable to, and therein lies the tragedy of defiance. This ultimate act of rebellion within Sodom, the persistent refusal to amend even when confronted with explicit warnings, is what ultimately precipitated their annihilation. God's patience was exhausted. His judgment was swift, but it was also equitable. The cities were utterly annihilated. However, the tragedy extended beyond mere physical obliteration. It resided in the spiritual demise of a people who resolutely refused to heed the call. The question persists for us. Will we heed the call? Will we turn from our own insubordination? Or will we, akin to the populace of Sodom, disregard the pronouncements of caution until it is irrevocably too late? Divine judgment upon Sodom and Gomorrah was absolute. The cities, once hubs of vitality, affluence, and indulgence, ceased to exist, all due to their obdurate refusal to listen. Their transgression reached its zenith, and the divine forbearance concluded. Incinerating elements and saline vapors rained down from the celestial sphere, transforming what had been a vibrant metropolis into naught but a smoldering wasteland. The populace had been granted every avenue for amendment, every chance to renounce their wickedness. Nevertheless, they elected to remain unchanged. They persisted in their arrogance, their insubordination, and their defiance of divine principles, and ultimately, their refusal to listen led to their demise. While this account may appear as a relic of antiquity, it is imperative to recognize that the very transgressions that led to Sodom's destruction persist in our era. We continue to witness sexual immorality that breaches all boundaries. We observe societal norms that endorse actions contrary to the divine blueprint for humanity. We continue to grapple with pride, persuading ourselves that we are independent of divine necessity, capable of navigating life without His guidance. We continue to neglect hospitality, failing to extend compassion to strangers, to embrace the outsider as the Almighty commands. We continue to disregard the plight of the impoverished and the needy, forgetting that God's heart is inclined towards the marginalized and the oppressed. And perhaps most sorrowfully, many still live in rebellion, turning away from the divine voice, refusing to attend to His warnings and His invitations to amendment. However, here lies the crucial truth. The Almighty has not undergone any alteration. He remains just. He continues to harbor profound concern for the downtrodden and the fractured. And while His justice is inevitable, His mercy remains accessible to those who turn to Him. Just as God dispatched His messengers to caution Sodom, He consistently dispatches His emissaries today to proclaim His truth, to extend His clemency, and to grant us every possibility to turn from our iniquitous paths. Prior to the fiery descent upon Sodom, God granted them a period of grace. He afforded them opportunities, but they declined. Consequently, the lesson is unambiguous. Divine patience is a characteristic, but it is not boundless. His justice will manifest, but so too will His mercy if we turn to Him with a penitent spirit. Following the cataclysmic devastation of Sodom and Gomorrah, Lot and his offspring embarked on the arduous journey towards a small township known as Zoar. By divine benevolence, Zoar was spared from the celestial retribution that had annihilated the other municipalities, and it was there that Lot and his family sought sanctuary. Genesis chapter 19, verse 22. However, their period of respite proved to be ephemeral. Lot, consumed by apprehension and uncertainty regarding Zoar's prospects, harbored concerns that the city might encounter the same fiery fate as Sodom and Gomorrah. Compelled by this dread, he elected to abandon the municipality and lead his family to the comparative security of a cavern nestled deep within the mountains. Genesis chapter 19, verse 30. What should have been a time of tranquility and recuperation instead heralded the commencement of a lamentable downward trajectory. But this is not merely a chronicle of escape and endurance. It serves as a somber admonition concerning the repercussions of failing to entirely forsake sin, even after being liberated from its clutches. Lot's account takes a devastating turn. Solitary within the cavern with his daughters, enveloped by isolation and fear, they confronted an overwhelming realization. The obliteration of Sodom signified the extinction of their familial lineage. With hope seemingly gone, their despair gave rise to a troubling decision. In the shadows of the cave, choices were made that blurred the line between survival and transgression, leaving behind a legacy as tragic as the ruins they had fled. The outcome of this transgression was the birth of two sons, Moab and Ben-Ami, who would subsequently become the progenitors of the Moabites and Ammonites, two nations that would later emerge as enduring adversaries of Israel. Genesis chapter 19, verses 36 through 38. This tragic episode transcends mere moral failing. It offers a profound contemplation on the enduring consequences of sin that persist long after deliverance has been attained. While Lot and his daughters had been rescued from the fiery annihilation of Sodom, the emotional scars, the unchecked apprehension, and the profound moral lapse continued to afflict them. Even after experiencing divine clemency and liberation, the temptation to cling to past transgressions and fears propelled them down a destructive path. Despite their salvation, they were not immune to the reverberations of their prior choices. Following the grievous incident involving his daughters, Lot's response is not explicitly detailed within the biblical text. However, we can infer his situation based on the subsequent occurrences. After Lot and his daughters sought refuge in the cave and engaged in this sinful act, there is no public reaction recorded from Lot in the scriptures. This could signify a silent, profound sorrow, or perhaps a deep sense of disappointment with himself and the unfolding events. Nevertheless, it is evident that in the subsequent developments, Lot did not undergo complete transformation. Although he was rescued from the destruction of Sodom, the psychological ramifications and the sinful actions of his family continued to impact him. Despite his deliverance, he still had to confront the consequences of decisions beyond his immediate control. A significant observation is that following this episode, Lot continued to reside in a location distant from the major urban centers, adopting a more secluded existence. Yet this incident still serves as a potent reminder that the repercussions of sin cannot be entirely evaded, even when one is saved from peril. Thus, it can be posited that Lot's reaction post-event may have been characterized by apathy or despondency. However, it also underscores a crucial lesson concerning sin and salvation. Even when we achieve salvation, we cannot entirely extricate ourselves from our transgressions without genuine internal change and healing. The narrative of Lot and his daughters serves as a reminder that while divine mercy can extricate us from the consequences of our sins, true recuperation and metamorphosis demand more than mere physical escape. Salvation is not simply a matter of averting judgment. It entails a profound internal alteration. This metamorphosis necessitates the renunciation of old customs, apprehensions, and habits. Divine deliverance from destruction is an invitation not merely to survive, but to flourish, to transform, and to embrace a life of obedience. What transpired within the cavern serves as a stark illustration of how our actions, even subsequent to experiencing divine grace, can be profoundly influenced by unresolved inner conflicts. Lot's lingering dread and the moral shortcomings of his daughters reflect the internal struggles that many of us encounter subsequent to our rescue from sin. God may deliver us from peril, but it is our individual responsibility to renounce our former ways and permit His transformation to take root within our hearts. This narrative offers a potent reflection on how, even when divine compassion is demonstrated and deliverance is provided, the struggle against sin does not conclude once danger has been circumvented. Salvation is an ongoing progression, a continuous turning away from the past and an embracing of the new existence that God offers. The account of Lot reminds us that even after deliverance, vigilance is essential. We must permit God to mold our hearts, casting aside the fear and the sins that once held us captive. Only then can we fully experience the liberty that salvation bestows. Therefore, as we contemplate this narrative, we must pose the question to ourselves: are we genuinely relinquishing the past? Are we allowing God to effect transformation within our hearts? Or are we still clinging to the sins and fears that once impeded our progress? Divine grace is readily available to us, but the onus rests upon us to fully embrace it and permit His work within us to reach completion. This narrative is not intended to instill fear. Rather, its purpose is to awaken us all. It serves as a reminder to introspect on our individual lives, our respective communities, and the innermost chambers of our hearts. How often do we find ourselves retracing the same missteps as Sodom? How frequently do we permit ourselves to be obscured by arrogance, avarice, or a sense of complacent satisfaction? How often do we deliberately overlook those matters that hold the utmost significance for God? The decisions we render today carry ramifications, both for ourselves and for those in our proximity. While God is indeed merciful, He also anticipates our attentiveness, our willingness to adapt, and our commitment to amendment. We are not exempt from the very temptations and failings that precipitated Sodom's downfall. How numerous are the instances where we witness injustice in our surroundings and fail to intervene? How often do we cling to our pride, believing ourselves to be beyond reproach or immune to divine scrutiny? The story of Sodom compels us to engage in introspection and to pose challenging questions regarding the condition of our own hearts. Therefore, I inquire of you, what insights resonated most profoundly with you from this narrative? Was it the destructive potency of hubris? Was it the imperative call for justice on behalf of the impoverished and the oppressed? Or was it the earnest plea for repentance before the opportunity has irrevocably passed? What aspects of your life might necessitate recalibration? Is there something within your heart that requires renunciation? Is there an element that you must relinquish to fully embrace God's mercy and truth? Kindly share your thoughts and reflections in the comments section below. I would be delighted to hear from you. Collectively, we can glean wisdom from the past and make more judicious choices for our future. Furthermore, if this message has illuminated your understanding, please bestow a like, disseminate it to others, and subscribe for access to more profound biblical insights and life-altering lessons. Let us not allow this opportune moment to slip away. Let us seize this chance for contemplation, for amendment, and for seeking God's mercy while it is still within our grasp. God is beckoning us to exist in His truth, to allow His compassion to mold us into the individuals He has designated us to be. Let us learn from the past to prevent its recurrence. Let us resolve today to orient ourselves towards God, to live with purpose, and to adhere to His ways. Time is a precious commodity. Let us utilize it judiciously.